Huh? Check. See, the people that jump on this, they get the real behind the scenes. We're just sitting here and we're like, tech stuff. Oh, man.
Ooh.
Also, this, check. We haven't gone live in a bit. Check. And we've been quiet for a bit, so people are like, what?
What?
What? What?
Stormtrooper. I put that whole bit in.
Oh, yes. I put the whole bounty hunter bit, in our top shelf, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, looks like the stream's moving steady. No one's on yet, so that's probably good. But
our adoring fans.
Oh man, I'm gonna wait a second and look at these audio clips. Make sure got them all in order. Stormtrooper. You put that in the last episode?
The one that came out today.
I haven't gotten to that part yet. I have listened to a chunk of it. Let me see. That's funny. All right. You ready?
Yes.
We got people watching. That's exciting. Thanks for jumping on, guys. We're just waiting for you.
Yeah, that's what we're waiting on.
Oh, so. Hopefully, we have 4 people on, man. So there you go. We are starting music. 3, 2, 1. That's you dancing to it. This is the good one. Kind of like it. Welcome to the Canon Cantina, the Star Wars show where we like to ask and answer the question, who is Luke Skywalker, before the release of Star Wars Episode 9. Today's a special episode, Mike. I would say it's pretty special because it's our first of... I assume we're going to have more of these in the future. We haven't really discussed this, but...
maybe.
Summary episodes. And what do we mean by summary episodes? We basically mean, what have we done on the show thus far? Where has Luke... traveled in the stories so far. We're going to do these so it's actually tangible to keep track rather than expecting you to listen to our entire audio feed or just get every little detail, right, Mike? So
yeah, that's right. So the idea for these was to make a jumping on point for new listeners that didn't need to go back to listen to all of our old episodes. Certainly can't if they want to, but if you are a new listener looking at a continuous dive into Luke's arc through both Legends and canon, jumping in the middle is pretty daunting, and you might feel pretty confused. So we're going to try to distill our first 30 episodes or so in these kind of recap episodes, just to give sort of the high points and a place for new listeners to jump on.
Yeah, I really enjoy it, Mike, and I think it's a great place for us to do this too, because it with the fast approaching 40 days away, basically, Star Wars Celebration, and it'll be actually less days when you listen to this episode in your podcast feed, unless you're catching us live on the stream. It's going to be basically a month, Mike, before we know it. If we just blink here, it's going to be a month till Star Wars Celebration, and what a time to kind of summarize what we've done on the show so far. And that's what I'm kind of pretty excited about today.
Yeah. So if you are a new listener who's jumping in at this point, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Yes.
So we try to frame our discussion about Luke around a set of 3 questions that are basically the same, but the last one's a little different depending on if we're talking about Legends or old expanded universe stuff, or if it's a current canon source. So the questions for Legends sources. State is Lucan as he begins his journey, and how do the events and characters he encounters impact his development as a hero? And Jesse, what's the one we do for Legend sources?
Is this for Legends or
Yeah.
canon? How Luke's experiences in the story make him different from the Luke we meet in The Last Jedi?
That's right, because we got the idea to start this show because so many people are like, that's not what Luke would have done. That's not my Luke. My Luke was Luke in all these books.
Right.
Well, and that's kind of what we're looking at now.
Yeah, and the true irony is, Mike, is we're finding a lot of things in the canon and the Legends are, I would say, it's kind of interesting where we're at right now because I think we're at a pivot point. We're going to see a lot more of maybe the Luke people are talking about, but Luke's been fairly consistent and inconsistent at times with the Luke in The Last Jedi, dramatically so on both sides of that. So I'm kind of excited to see where more of this leads. Today, Mike, we're specifically going to go through what you just mentioned, those legend stories that we've covered so far, starting with the original trilogy into the Legends titles. So that's kind of where we are picking up today.
Yeah, so if you go back to our old episodes, we sort of jump around. 1 week we do Legends story, 1 week we do canon, Legends canon, alternating. We're just going to try to give a quick run through of all the Legends high points in a row here so that it's a lot easier for new people to.
I like that a lot. And today it's pretty interesting going forward, Mike, because I feel like we're kind of, what a stopping point we've reached here, but I kind of would call this the first major era of Legends. There's been a lot of books that came out that we're about to get into that were still around the same publishing time, but I think a lot of people kind of consider this the first era of Legends, first big chunk of time with our heroes, and it's a good spot to move on from and see what goes from there.
Yeah.
So I'm interested at that, but maybe our Luke questions aren't going to come up today as much, Mike, but it's good we covered them.
Yeah. I mean, those are the things we talk about with each individual story. I guess the last question we'll still talk about some, but really we're just kind of trying to give a little recap of what Luke has done and maybe the best and worst of each of these stories, or just some of the higher low points of them.
Well, let's just jump right in. Let's go to that Luke clip.
Looking for him.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
It's a lot of rumors, stories,
And I became a legend.
I am
people
so
that know
tired.
him best.
Skywalker. Luke.
It's all true.
I am a Jedi. Like my father before me.
All of it.
Okay. So now that we've gone through our special Luke clip, Mike, we're going to jump right into the story, and we're going to start off right off the bat with Star Wars A New Hope was the start of all this, right?
So I don't think we need to talk about the movies.
Yeah.
I assume if you're listening to a Star Wars podcast, you've seen the movies.
This is a good
But,
reference point,
this-
though, right? For
Yeah,
when we're
yeah,
jumping
that's
into
where-
the story.
That's where everything starts for both canon and Legends. So this Legends timeline that we're looking at starts with A New Hope, and right now, the most recent stories we watched are about 12 years after the Battle of Yavin. So we've actually covered a lot of time in universe.
I like that.
But the first two stories are A New and Empire Strikes Back, which obviously you've seen.
Right. But what's interesting is why we use that reference point, Mike. We immediately go into one of the first major Legends sources and Legends, sort of what we called a multimedia event. And that was a book that bridged the gap between Star Wars Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars Return of the Jedi. It's called Shadows of the Empire. And that was actually one of our first couple episodes we did of the show. Actually, our first Legends source we did.
Yeah, I think it was actually our third episode or something. Yeah, this was a novel, a comic crossover, a video game, a soundtrack.
That's right.
It was all the marketing push of a movie without the movie in 1996 or whatever it was. And it was largely successful. But this one sticks out because it's the only one that happens between movies. Obviously, this is Luke preparing to go save Han or whatever. And looking at this list of Legends stories, this one is probably one of my favorites that we've done so far. a lot of that might just be nostalgia from us, being the target demographic when it came out.
Right. And we mentioned the multimedia event. Mike and I consumed almost every element of that media, if not every element of that media at the time. So that was a big part of this as well. But something I don't think you just mentioned, Mike, which I always like mentioning with this, is it was a multimedia event akin to a movie or something like that, which you said, but every element, every media or text device told a different part of the story, which was a very interesting part. Case in point of different texts in the story, the comic book only focused on the bounty hunters mainly, and the book actually did the entire story. The video game focused on Dash Rendar's story. So it's kind of interesting to piece them all together and kind of get Luke's story in this. Luke in this story is one of my personal favorite Lukes. It's Luke after he's kind of finished his first part of his training with Yoda and obviously Obi-Wan, and he's evolving into that Luke we eventually see at the start of Return of the Jedi, the very dramatic entrance with the fully Jedi Luke, Jedi Knight Luke. And so this book kind of transitions Luke, and this is also where Luke in Legends makes the green lightsaber.
Yeah, and I feel like overall in Shadows of the Empire, Luke is almost a side character to the events going on with Dash, Rendar, and with like
Vader.
Leia and Vader
Shizor.
and Shizor. But the development is done because this is the first time we get the concept of him going back to Ben Kenobi's home on Tatooine and learning to build the green lightsaber. So obviously that's a pretty big milestone, because, canon or not, that it like figuring out how Luke got the green lightsaber is really important.
Yeah, and the green lightsaber is important for us. It's part of our image, as you see right here on the stream, and our Canon Cantina logo. So I like mentioning it. But then, of course, we go from Luke in Shadows of the Empire straight into Return of the Jedi, and you guys know what happens in that. But once again, Canon and Legends have these movies as pivot points. They have them as reference points. And we know that's kind of the Luke story. That is the Luke movie. If you haven't listened to our Return of the Jedi episode, I think, Mike, it's our fourth episode, technically our fifth episode if you count episode 0, where we introduce the concept of the show and our stories. So it's technically our fifth episode. I highly recommend you listening to that one because it's probably our deepest dive, because it kind of had to be, because it's just Luke through and through, and his Jedi stuff, his Jedi arc.
I feel like we did that episode like 17 years ago.
I know, right?
We've just covered so much since then.
I had a friend who recently got into our show, and he texted me and was like, man, I loved you guys' deep dive on Return of the Jedi. He's like, I know it's really long, but it was like really thorough, and you guys covered everything, and I really liked it. And I was like, and when he said that, I sat down and said, when did we record that? Was that like 2 years ago? That's what I thought.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Man. So, but we've got to talk about the next book, Mike. So immediately after the events of Return of the Jedi, we have another popular book in culture back in the 90s, and just the first actual jumping off point post Return of the Jedi.
And we're going to get real weird with it.
Yeah.
Paraphrase Frank Reynolds.
Yeah.
The truce at Bakura happens immediately after Return of the Jedi, and is a significant left turn, I think, from the type of story established in the movies to that point.
Right.
Basically, dinosaur invaders are harassing people of Bakura or something, and Luke has to go stop them. I forget some of the specifics of it, but the
sentient
the thing that sticks out with
dinosaurs.
everybody is the Searook are basically dinosaurs that use robots to drain the life force from people to power their ships. Something.
Yeah, they basically drain people's souls and life force and put them into battle droids to fight for them, which is, I don't like the souls life force part, but I do like battle droids working for lizard people. But, this was like, we talked about this on the show too, Mike, and you guys can listen to our old episode on this, but like, I personally said this was too sci-fi for Star Wars. The story was, even though
I was about to say, you heard it here first, Whovians. Jesse is pro Cyberman.
Man, I was not ready for a Whovian cut. Man, I've been devouring David Tennant's new podcast, by the way, side note, but it's so good. And it's so concise, and he's so personable. But I just thought this story was way too sci-fi, but Mike and I mentioned on the show there actually is some interesting Luke growth in this story. Luke's given command of a cruiser of like a Corvette, and he screws up and doesn't like it. He doesn't enjoy feeling people die. Essentially, when fighters are dying, he's feeling it, and this is like his first time experiencing that. Also, we have Luke's first Jedi trance, where he starts learning how to basically speed up the natural healing of the cells in his body. And we actually have Luke, a lot of interesting stuff in the story, Mike. We have Luke approached by Ben Kenobi. We have Luke remembering how it felt to be electrocuted by Palpatine and recovering from that. He's got some serious injuries. And then we had Leia approached by Anakin Skywalker in his non-Vader form, the Sebastian Shaw form, and really interesting story in that way. And we also had Luke's first girlfriend.
There we go. None of that other crap mattered. That's the thing that sticks out in Truce of Bakura. Luke's first girlfriend, Gary Capstian or something like that. I got the first name right.
Yeah, a character that Mike and I really liked a second time through, which was refreshing. We'll see if that stands up for Callista. But
oh god,
she's coming up real quick, man, real quick. But Luke's first girlfriend, they weren't like super serious. She was a senator, and basically her and Luke kind of
following in his father's steps. I tell you,
I know. Fell in love during this sea route conflict with these raptor men from Dinotopia or wherever they were from. But that's what I like to think. But it didn't work out. But she didn't die, Mike. That's kind of the thing that's interesting.
But she lived, and I think we actually see her again later on.
I think so.
Doing which is kind of
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see Bakura again, actually, Mike, if I remember correctly. And I'm excited to see what happens with that, how they retcon some of the Bakura stuff. So we will see if she's involved in that story arc. I don't remember either. I'm very excited. But let's move on from Bakura, and let's move on to a book I really enjoyed called Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. And that was a book. Mindor was actually a book that was written, Mike, much later. We talked about on the show. It was written by Stover, the guy who wrote some of the novelizations of the prequels and some of the other original trilogy books. And it was a book that basically filled in gaps, and Luke screws up in this book too, I guess, is what we're about to say. He has a Mon Cala cruiser at the beginning, if you remember that. I don't know if you remember.
Oh yeah, I did forget.
The gravity wells
basically
mines
crashes a Mon Calamari cruiser. Luke's not a great pilot of capital ships, I guess. He's a good X-Wing pilot. But,
what I like in the story, though, Mike, is like Luke experiences the same thing he does at Bakura. A lot of men die under his command, and he almost can't handle it. He's not cut out for the military. He doesn't like sending people into war. He doesn't like killing people, and he doesn't like seeing men under his command die. And when the Mon Cala cruiser goes down, everybody pretty much dies but Luke. So that's a guilt moment for him. But also, this is an interesting story. Kind of, we talked about gothic horror themed at times. There was a guy posing to be an ancient Sith Lord who actually wasn't a Sith Lord at all.
Who had the stupidest bad guy name, Lord Shadow Spawn. Ooh. Yeah, and his Sith power is wearing funny hats. Ooh.
Yeah, that wasn't actually him though, Mike, if you remember correctly. I'm sure you remember that, but that was...
No, I don't remember that. I just remember that something about a funny hat tied into it.
That was just the mouthpiece for the actual Bane bad guy. He was using all those drones of people under his mind control. But this is a really fun story, and it moved really quickly, which I enjoyed. So it's worth reading. But then we get into the next story.
Well, hold on, because Luke didn't quite get another girlfriend in
Mindor?
Shadows of Mindor, wow, because he got her killed too quick before he could seal the deal, and she could, they could put a bow on their relationship. I've been trying to find her name.
Was that girl force sensitive? No.
She
was a smuggler or something.
She wasn't. Yeah,
someone that kind of had interest in Luke, and Luke was protecting her, and she got vampire killed by the main villain, but that didn't work out. Luke always has to be alone. That's the theme we're seeing in a lot of these. R2's his only friend. Oh, Mike, but if I don't remember how this story ended. I loved it so much. Remember R2 saving Luke's body? That was awesome. Remember Luke being like,
What? Why can't I find her name?
you're gonna like,
Hold on.
this is good. This is great stream content. You guys that are watching right now, we really appreciate it.
Doing it live.
We appreciate you watching and bearing through with us as we create great content.
He hates it when I do this stuff, but it was going to bother me if I didn't.
Fair enough.
If I couldn't find it. What's her name? I actually read this one too. Anyway, basically Luke meets a new girl that he likes, but he gets her killed
Was that
before
the girl
she can
that
become.
Han was hitting on? The redheaded smuggler girl? Or was that a different girl entirely?
Different one. Different one. Why can I not find?
I don't. Maybe
Like,
her name will.
she was
come
all
back
over
up.
this book. Can I just turn to a page and yeah. Anyway,
Well, we got to move on to the next story, Mike, because the next story has some interesting things that come back in Legends, and that's the courtship of Princess Leia. So, long story short, this is mainly a Han and Leia book with Luke on the side doing things, right? And that's Han and Leia on the planet Dathomir, which, as we know, is canonical, a very popular and mentioned planet in Clone Wars and other sources and things like that. But there is a conflict going on in Dathomir between the women of Dathomir, and it is all the women, good witches and bad witches. We can say it that simply if we want to. But we have the Night Sisters.
Sure.
Night Sisters are the bad witches, and the Dathomirian witches are the good ones. And Luke basically helps them come to a conclusion in their conflict. He helps out the good ones. But most importantly in this story, Mike, I would say, is Luke finds the Chun Thor in this series. If you remember the Chun Thor.
Aona was her name.
Aona. That's good.
The girlfriend that Luke got
Great
killed.
name. Great name. So, Mike, tell us about the Chun Thor. I know you know about that.
Yeah, no, Chun Thor was an old like Jedi library in space kind of deal.
They were kind of going on
just like an
Star
old
Trek missions.
ancient training ship for young Jedi that ended up around planet Dathomir.
That's right. And it crashed, and Luke found a lot of ancient Jedi texts and things like that on the Chun Thor, and that was pretty exciting. But most importantly in this story, Luke actually fought against some Night Sisters, which in Legends they were introducing cool stuff like dark side users who are not Sith, people that just use the Force naturally, like the witches and the Night Sisters. And, you know, Han and Leia are in there, and Han's, you know, trying to get Leia to marry him and all that stuff. That's part of that story as well. But that one doesn't hold up quite as well. It drags in some places
that one,
too.
Honestly, that one's not very good. But another important group of people that's introduced is the Hapes Consortium in that book. It's
Romulans.
like a separate peaceful-ish government that's not part of the New Republic and not part of the Empire, but they're big enough and have their own fleet and need to be, you know, like they're a force to be reckoned with, and we'll see them again in future books.
100%. So then, Mike, that led us into a pivotal moment of our show and a pivotal moment of Legends. We did the Thrawn trilogy in its entirety, 3 episodes back to back, starting with Thrawn trilogy, Heir to the Empire first. Highly considered some of the best parts of Legends ever, still hold up today. And it was exciting for us to go back through it. But what's most interesting to me, Mike, in this storyline is Luke is very real. He's a real person. His powers are very reined in. He's basically the Luke we see in Return of the Jedi. He hasn't really learned anything exceptional in the way of leveling up Force powers. But he also in the story meets Mara Jade. He interacts with Thrawn. He interacts with...
I think we need to talk about Thrawn for a second because he is the first villain since the films that actually sort of lived up to the like stature and, you know, like imposing nature of a formidable Imperial villain. Wasn't a Jedi, just expert military commander who was kind of pretentious about art and claimed that's how he knew everything.
Oh my goodness. He knew more than
Tell me I'm wrong.
He knew history, he knew art, he knew culture. He just had an affinity towards people's art, but he had an obsession with learning about people's history and art and their ways of the planets and tying that to their military and their politicians and all that. And of course, as Mike's alluding to, he would use those knowledge to beat people in combat. So I'm sure he could tear the Hapen people up. You never know. But we never got to see them interact. They were very proud people, the Hapens were, even though they had those insane Battle Dragon cruisers. I bet Thrawn could find a way to defeat them. But we're introduced to Thrawn. We're introduced to Pelion, who's one of the best characters in all of Star Wars Legends EU. And Pelion is kind of the reference point and the story for the bad guys, because we never get Thrawn's mind directly. We just get Pelion interpreting what Thrawn's doing, which is always really interesting. And then Luke is a reference point, and then Han and Leia a reference point. But then we get introduced to the Smugglers, which eventually become the Smugglers Consortium, right, Mike? And the Smugglers Alliance. Yeah, but Mara Jade and Talon Card are the smugglers in that, and they're prominent characters that are going to come up again in Legends and are great characters that people love.
And honestly, upon revisiting it, I felt like they were actually the weakest characters of that story. But taking it back to Luke, we also meet our first true Jedi since the films, in the form of Joruus C'baoth, a guy who's lost his mind and thinks he can control Thrawn and the Empire and get his hands on Luke and or Leia's kids to train them. And we meet one of the most important characters in Legends, Luke.
No, I would not say Luke. Luke. That's clearly the weakest part of this entire story. But that's the very finale, Mike. But Joruus C'baoth.
I don't know that he's the weakest part, because clones become a big deal in some of these legend stories, and this is the first time we really see clones. What we're talking about when we say Luke, for those of you that haven't read
before you get to that, I got to mention in the second book when Joruus C'baoth trains Luke. And I feel like this is pretty relevant. Before Joruus C'baoth goes full bat on Luke, and Luke realizes that he shows Luke how he basically flexes his Jedi muscles around Luke and basically says, hey, as a Jedi, you can control people. You can run governments. You can run small towns and cities because you are the most powerful person. And something we learn about Joruus C'baoth is that he has been basically doing Palpatine-esque things on a smaller scale. He's been ruling through fear and shocking people in towns.
He's crazy.
And he's super crazy. And they're like, don't mess with that guy. Just do whatever he says. Pay him his tax money, whatever. Bring him meals. He's living high and mighty. So when Luke actually goes and finds him, because Luke thinks he's a true Jedi, and Luke is so excited. He's like, oh, I'm going to have another Jedi master like Ben and Yoda. Luke's in for a rude awakening, and Luke actually figures it out.
It took him entirely too long. Luke was a little bit of a dumb boy, being naive about the situation.
Zahn was one off of the movies. I think is pretty consistent. But Luke, R2, and Mara Jade fight.
I understand,
him, which is great. C'baoth.
It's okay. I understand the time it was written in, but in the context of everything we're talking about, it was pretty naive of him to be like, oh, this guy seems totally normal and not unstable at all. I'm going to go learn to be a Jedi from him. Then it turns this guy had found Luke's hand that Vader cut off and grown the rest of Luke from that hand.
Yeah.
So the way that clones are presented in these books, they're given like a double letter in their name as you're reading it to differentiate it from like the normal person. So Luke, Luke, clone of him, Luuke, Luke.
Final boss fight.
And Luke. Yeah. Luke wasn't quite all there either, because it was a not perfect cloning process, I guess is what you could call it.
Yeah. Something I liked, though, is C'baoth lured Luke in, not necessarily purely off Luke's naivety, but more off of like him reaching out to Luke across the galaxy with the Force, like Luke did to Leia in the films. And Luke was basically like, well, the only person I've ever done this before was Ben and Leia. So like surely this is a Jedi doing this. Luke has no exposure to, and what's interesting about this too, Mike, is we got to mention this guy's not a Sith, which makes it even weirder. but he is a Dark Jedi for sure.
He's a Dark Jedi clone. He's a clone himself, actually.
Right.
It's eventually revealed. I don't know. I still think Luke's being pretty naive there because he's met 4 Jedi in his life. Right. Yoda, Obi-Wan, Palpatine, and Vader, Dark Jedi. Okay. So he's at a 50% success rate on who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. You'd think he'd be a little bit more wary of, oh my God, this guy just talked to me in my mind across the galaxy. Right. I have to go listen to what he says.
He just was way too excited. He's like, I need to learn more about the Force because something we haven't mentioned yet about Luke in the story is he's pretty down on himself because we haven't mentioned this yet in the story, Mike, but we've obviously been leading up to this. Luke has forsaken his command titles. He's no longer a military standing of whatsoever anything at this point. He's thrown it away.
To which his next Starship crew said, oh, thank God we're not going to die because this guy sucks as a military commander.
Well, he hates it. He just wants to be, wandering Jedi with R2 mainly, which happens a lot. So, of course, we haven't mentioned Mara Jade yet, and probably a good time to mention her, Mike, in more detail. She was essentially an agent of the Emperor back in the day. In the original trilogy, right? I'm not falling for that. And the Emperor's Hand, right? I'm saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, she was the Emperor.
She was an assassin.
She was obsessed with killing Luke.
Yeah. She was trained by Palpatine literally through the dark side. Once again, not a Sith, which I think is great. She was just a assassin, highly trained assassin, Imperial agent that had Force sensitivity, and Palpatine took advantage of that, but he also taught her some Force things, even though very subtly he taught her very little. And he kind of manipulated her and basically said, your whole life's mission is to kill Skywalker, and if you do that, you'll be my apprentice. You'll take Vader's spot and all this stuff. Normal Palpatine stuff.
And then she found the loophole and killed Luke to shut up all the
Palpatine voices in her head.
Training.
Yeah. What's really interesting about this story, Mike, is she still kind of hates Luke at this point, even though at this point Luke has kind of proved that he's the White Knight to her. He's saved her from like death in the forest from Bornskers. He's saved her life a number of times. He's like literally put the handcuffs back on him after she had him a prisoner and he escaped, and then he just came right back willingly, and she's like, who escapes and comes back? And he's just like, I told you I have nothing to hide, like I'm not lying to you, and just blew her mind. But once again, she goes off with Talon to start the Smugglers Alliance at the end of this story, but she will come up again.
I hate that you call him the White Knight. Anyway, if you only read,
it's a trope.
If you only read like one, if you only read like one set of these Legends books, I would start with the Thrawn trilogy. Yeah, it's
and Shadow's the
sort
Empire,
of the basis for all of this. Yeah, I'd start with those three. Next one though it was the first Legends comic that we talked about. Oh, no. Dark Empire. Oh no, we're not getting crazy yet. Dark Empire 1.
Okay, good.
Was actually pretty good.
It's pretty good. Has a really fantastic audio drama with it that I go into greater detail on our Dark Empire episode. But essentially, it was a audio drama from Mike and I's childhood. Pretty good voice acting from almost everybody, including an appearance from Billy D. Williams playing actual Lando. And it's pretty exciting.
Anthony Daniels, right?
Anthony Daniels is, of course, in it. But those are the two main people, but everybody else does a pretty good impersonation, and including, as Mike said on the episode, the Palpatine impersonator. It's pretty good. Pretty good. And if you want a quick way to get through that comic, just listen to that audiobook. Just know that it's from the 90s, but it still holds up.
Well, honestly, the audio drama might take longer than the comic, but it's probably higher quality than reading the comic.
We get actually the Luke staying down in the Emperor's bunkers, tunnels, right? And that's better explained in the audiobook, not really explained in the comic.
Yeah, so the gist of the story is Palpatine's back. He's a clone. Yeah. Oh, we couldn't think of another original bad guy, so we brought him back. Now that we have clones, and he has a phone call with Luke he turns Luke to the dark side is basically what happened in the span of a page and a half of the comic. Luke thinks, I'm going to go to the dark side and learn it so that I destroy it from within.
Yeah, I'm going to kill
But he
Palpatine.
actually just
He's like,
kinda-
I'm going to kill Palpatine. And
he just actually ends up over on the dark side with the Empire retreat to the deep core of the galaxy and launching surprise attacks on the rest of the galaxy from there. They come up with these new super weapons, not giant Death Stars, but tiny little
terraformers.
Relatively tiny. They're like giant wallies, basically, that go around planets and just start sucking up all the materials. Giant roving factories called World Devastators.
That's right.
Yeah, pretty Death Star, World Devastator. Not a whole lot of flair in the naming department there.
Yeah, some relevant things in the story, Mike, I'd say would say the introduction of holocrons and Luke basically finding Palpatine's dark side holocron and not be able to look away, and he's just kind of like mesmerized by it. It's the dark side of the Force. And then we have, of course, the Luke being super powered because he's super powered by the dark side now, and like Palpatine comes and takes Luke away. And then, of course, we have the story ending in a pretty cool way. Luke's kind of the new Vader, and then Leia comes to save Luke. But before that, we haven't mentioned, which was probably one of the more interesting parts of the story, Luke's first use of his Last Jedi power. The special Last
That's right.
Jedi power.
There's a scene where Leia thinks she's rescued Luke and she's bringing him back on the Falcon. Right. And he's like, "Oh, I'm not going with you. I'm still on whatever other planet."
He's
and
on
he
the Star Destroyer
disappears.
still, the Emperor's flagship, the Eclipse. The super Star Destroyer, the Eclipse class. So Luke was basically projecting that he went away with Han and Leia, but he actually was with the Emperor the whole time. And in Luke's mind, it wasn't insidious. It was just Luke saying, "This is the only way, guys. I need to stay with the Emperor and keep him happy, basically, and be the new Darth Vader."
So I think we need to reiterate here. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 stories in after Return of the Jedi, and Luke has turned to the dark side. That's a pretty major mistake, obviously, that he's going to end up learning from, because, as he said, Leia does bring him back, and they use their Wonder Twins powers to defeat Space Palpatine or something.
I like it. I mean, it's once again, Leia's too powerful in Legends. It seems like right off the bat.
Then we take a bump of the cocaine and we start Dark Empire 2, the cash grabbing. It is the single most insane story we have talked about
thus far
on the show. It's not good, but it is crazy. Palpatine comes back with more clones. He's got a new super weapon called the Galaxy Gun, which fires hyperspace bullets across the galaxy.
The space jockey gun and Alien. The guy is just floating in space, because clearly this artist was way into heavy metal and Alien and H.R. Giger and all that stuff, which I'm super into, but maybe not for Star Wars. Maybe not. Maybe not for Star Wars.
So in Dark Empire 2, Luke finds an old Jedi library on a world called Ossus, which I think comes up again later. And he picks up 2 young students, a brother and a sister, Jim and whatever her dumb brother's name is.
Cam? Cam.
No, Cam wasn't the brother.
But Cam's there. He's like the mentor of those two.
Yeah. But we could probably say this is the big this is a bigger mistake than Luke turning to the dark side. Right. Luke picks up a young student, 16, 17, hopefully 18, so the space cops don't get him. I don't know. Luke has a makeout scene with his young student, and she is promptly killed 3 pages later. So another girlfriend that Luke picked up in Legends killed, and I think her brother died too, actually. And they found like a lightsaber repository, but accidentally got his new girlfriend and student killed. So if we're keeping score, that's the first official student that Luke lost in Legends.
Right. And something we haven't mentioned yet, when we'll get to in the story in a second, Mike. Before I forget, Mike, we had someone in the chat and they said Thrawn is the villain. Blasphemy. Which I really like. Yeah, Thrawn's pretty great. He was reuniting the Empire. There was that. But in this story, Mike, I talk about this on the show, especially on this episode, the Dark Empire 2 episode, and Dark Empire 1. It was kind of understood back then that the comics weren't as important as the novels, and this is an interesting part about
It's true.
Legends and canon, which is going to be different today, right, Mike? That's not the case with canon today. They make sure the comics are exactly the same. They kind of wrote them at the same time. Comic book people did their comic book stuff. They made them more comic booky, and the authors took it more seriously.
There was no Lucasfilm story
Right.
group to help guide things back then. But the reason we decided to still talk about these two stories is they are at least tangentially referenced by future books that take place after them, because it is mentioned later that Luke did turn to the dark side. That happened in Dark Empire. Some characters introduced in Dark Empire continue on in other stories.
Literally everything from Dark
the last-
Empire 2 is ignored except Cam. Everything.
But we cannot ignore
Cam.
how Emperor Palpatine actually dies, because he does meet his untimely
Gonna
end
do the
in Dark
impersonation
Empire.
again.
I'll try. So Palpatine is trying to transfer
Oh, I can't
his
handle
essence
this.
into baby
Can't
Anakin's
handle this again.
body.
Yeah, spirit style,
and yeah,
exorcist style.
and as he's trying to do this, Han whips around the corner, and it basically, instead of saying like "over my dead body," I forget the word for word, but Han's like, "No, over Palpatine's dead body," and shoots him in the back, and essentially kills Palpatine.
Right.
Like, yeah, his spirit got out, but then it didn't make it to Anakin, and so Han Solo technically killed the Emperor like 10 years later.
Mike,
10 years and like 70 clones.
You're forgetting the best part, as in the worst part. Palpatine's spirit tries
I'm
to
intentionally
tries to
forgetting.
escape and jumps into the robot man, floating man, armless quadriplegic man. That's
So
force sensitive.
among all of this insanity, they discover a pre-light civilization
Oh, yeah.
fleet in a nebula.
Very
But one of
sci-fi.
them happens to be
Not-
a Jedi or something, and he traps Palpatine's spirit and dies with him or something. Like I said, Dark
goofy.
Empire 2 feels like it's, from the cocaine fueled 80s, not the 90s. It's bad,
but
it is maybe entertaining if you've got an hour or so.
yeah,
Like, we didn't make any of that up. That's all real. Han kills Palpatine.
yeah. If you guys
he's
want
trying to
more,
take
just
it-
listen to our episode. We go pretty in depth and we shred it up pretty good. As much as I liked the art style in some of these series, I just thought it was an interesting choice. And as Mike mentioned on the episodes, the starfighters and battle droids are fantastic. These artists really went the extra mile with all the metallic stuff. Once again, that 80s heavy metal H.R. Giger stuff. But man, these stories are rough, especially Dark Empire 2. Dark Empire 1, parts of it can be salvaged.
Dark Empire 1 is decent.
And the audiobook
especially
helps.
if you find the audiobook of
helps.
it. Yeah.
And if you got the nostalgia of the audiobook like I do, oh man, it's just so good. But yeah, the Dark Journals of Palpatine, man, I love it. But let's move on from Dark Empire, Mike, because we talked about a pivotal trilogy in the Thrawn trilogy. We kind of glossed through really quickly, but we're going to go to another pivotal trilogy, which I would say with the concept of our show is probably even more important for us. And
I would say this might be the most important trilogy
without a doubt
of books that we talk about.
so
Yeah.
far, this is the most important thing. And this kind of becomes the focus of the Star Wars books later on. This group of Jedi in training that in this Jedi Academy trilogy. So the Jedi Academy trilogy is a trilogy of books that was written right after Thrawn and is written by Kevin J. Anderson. And it is essentially Luke starting the Jedi Temple in Legends. This is a point of contention and a point of consistency in a lot of ways with The Last Jedi and things like that. And hopefully what we'll see with Luke with more canonical things coming in the future. But this is kind of the Luke thing, what people wanted to see back in the day and want to see kind of today and all that, where Luke starts his own Jedi Academy, barely knowing how to do it, but he tries his best at the very beginning. And he goes around the galaxy finding Force-sensitive people in the first book. And, you know, we have some other stuff with Akbar and Lando and stuff, which is pretty cool, but it's mainly about Luke in these stories, which I like. And Han gets a spotlight in these books as well because of his relationship with Kip Duran, who is a new character who Mike and I mentioned is very Kylo-esque in nature, at least at the beginning. But what I said was
not the beginning.
Jason hasn't come into the picture yet because he's a child. But now Han and Leia have 3 kids. Well, they have Anakin in womb, I suppose, but they have 2 kids. Toddlers.
No, he was born just at the end of Dark Empire 2. Remember, because Palpatine
right.
was trying to transfer into him.
So they have 3 kids now, and they're also Force sensitive as well.
Yeah. So Han discovers on the spice mines of Kessel the original Mary Sue Kip Duran, young kid who is good at all things related to the Force and knows it, or at least learns it pretty quick as he orchestrates an escape for Han and Chewie from the spice mines of Kessel, and makes his way to Luke's Jedi Academy.
That's right. And yeah, Kip has that natural attunement to the Force we talked about, Mike, where it's just natural for him. He didn't even know it was the Force for a long time. But he tried spinning and it was a good trick.
It
worked out. But also we're introduced to a lot of other characters in this story. We're introduced to Cam, which was just a generic Jedi from Dark Empire, but we're also introduced to Gantoris, who was a Jedi that Luke proves himself. Luke proves himself to Gantoris. Gantoris kind of leads this tribe on this lava planet, and Luke kind of does these video game puzzles and mini quests for Gantoris to prove that he is who he says he is, and that he's because in this story, Mike, Luke's essentially coming to everyone and saying, I think you're a Jedi, or you have the potential to be a Jedi. And they're like, what's a Jedi? Almost everyone is. And Gantoris is one of those people. And Gantoris' story is interesting because Gantoris says, well, I'm not going with you unless you get my people somewhere else to live, because the conditions on our planet are already pretty unstable, it being a lava planet. So they actually moved Gantoris' people to Dantooine, which is important in the next book. But Luke starts training all these guys. And ladies that show up. We got some of the Dathomirian witches show up. We got Tenelka Dojo, right? And then we got Tion.
It's close. Teneniel Jo, Tenelka's mother.
That's right. That's right. Teneniel Jo.
That's later on down the line.
And Tion, who's a major character.
But yeah, Luke gets his first group of 12 students, which he is referenced pretty much directly in The Last Jedi. He doesn't set up his training academy on Yavin 4 in The Last Jedi. At least we don't know that he does. But that's where it is done in the Jedi Academy trilogy.
Right.
And yeah, so how does Luke repay Gantoris for earning his trust? He lets him fall to the dark side and die. So if you're keeping score, that's 2 students that I watch too much Sesame Street.
There's a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of things that happen. We've got to mention this, but Gantoris' people are killed by the Empire, and he basically comes after Luke and Leia and says, I thought you said my people would be safe. Luke and Leia moved them to Dantooine, and they thought, an old rebel base. It's got the structures for them to live. Well, the Empire found that. We were introduced in this story to Admiral Dala, another really amazing Imperial antagonist who we will see come up again. She's a brilliant villain, brilliant strategist who's been hiding in the Maw Cluster by Kessel for some time, waiting for her time to strike because she was waiting for a command for Palpatine to come out, which of course was never given because Palpatine and the Death Star are killed. So she kind of becomes the new Thrawn-esque character, I guess, in this story. But Gantoris goes bad because of that.
I will say we did decide when we recorded that episode that Admiral Dala is still sort of in canon, because if you remember in Solo, when the Millennium Falcon is escaping from Kessel. They run into a Star Destroyer. We've just kind of told ourselves, yeah, that was one of Admiral Dalla's. She's actually in there.
That's her.
So maybe we can use her again.
Pretty excited. I'm pretty excited about that.
That was the Gorgon.
Pretty excited to see her. Yeah, the Gorgon. Once again, keeping with the Greek mythology, we've got Thrawn's ship being the Chimera and Dalla's being the Gorgon. I don't know if they had a writers' meeting about that or what, or the little nod to each other. But yeah.
We do need to talk about one other important thing that came out of the Maw installation, which was a research facility. And that one important thing is the dumbest looking ship Star Wars has designed up to this point, the Sun Crusher.
It's like a telephone pole or something, kind of.
Yeah, with like a satellite dish on the end of it.
Man.
It fires resonance torpedoes because that's a thing. Sure. Resonance torpedoes into the sun. And it crushes them and destroys a solar system.
It creates a supernova inside of a sun, right, Mike? Basically, and that destroys the system, causes the sun to obviously explode and cause a chain reaction and destroy the entire system.
The original Star Killer base was a ship no bigger than the room I'm sitting in.
Yeah. They kind of give the appearance it's like X-wing size or something, or smaller than an X-wing actually. Yeah, but it's like an X-wing without the wings, just the center cockpit piece, essentially. Now, what happens in the story, Mike? There's so many things that happen in the storyline, and we really highly encourage you guys to listen to our Jedi Academy trilogy episodes because they are our most important texts so far, which is pretty interesting. But Kip gets a hold of the Sun Crusher, Mike. Let's just say that.
After he is used by the dark side, he doesn't grab this thing and decide to use it while he's, a good old kid.
So let's talk about the dark side of the story. Let's just talk about what happened to Gantoris and then eventually what happens to Kip.
Okay. Yeah, so Luke picked one of the worst planets possible to set up his Jedi Academy.
Poor guy.
Because
that's what my Mothman gave him.
I know. He like if they didn't know, he didn't know. If only he had read more of the Holocron, he would have found out that, this was the site of an ancient Sith massacre. Like genocide, where the Sith Lord named Exar Kun wiped out the entire population of this planet to trap himself in Star Wars Horcruxes, basically.
Because he was defeated by the ancient Jedi of the Old Republic. Because he was a problem, obviously, doing mass genocides on people, and the Jedi dealt with him. It took a lot of Jedi to kill him, Mike, and they didn't even fully kill him. They just kind of locked him away in a, like you said, a Horcrux of sorts. Yeah. And so he's in a spirit form. Think of him as a evil Ben Kenobi, and he seduces Gantoris, and Gantoris eventually dies. Because once again, Mike, I guess we got to mention this might be the first. Yeah, maybe the first inference of this where a Jedi or Sith from the grave can actually affect the material world through force lightning or force push or something like that, which obviously we see we see Yoda do in front of Luke on The Last Jedi, which for some reason made a lot of people mad.
Taurus dies perhaps the most gruesome death we've seen in Star Wars, like film, canon, old legends, basically burned from the inside out by Exar Kun's like Sith hatred or whatever. Rough stuff.
It's pretty rough, and Luke and his students find Gantoris dead, and it's very demoralizing for Luke and all of his students.
And he says, "You know what? Let's take the day off."
Yeah, no lessons today. What's really interesting in the story is at this point, Kip is seduced by Exar Kun next, essentially playing on Kip's hatred of the Empire, Kip's hatred of what the Empire has done to his family and taking his brother away from his family and all this stuff. And Kip is now kind of a repository, a body for Kip, for Exar Kun in a way. And Kip and Exar Kun actually approach Luke outside one night when Luke's doing his meditation outside. And they actually basically Sith lightning freeze Luke into a Sith coma. That's the not the technical term here, but that's the fun term.
It's not a Buster Bluth coma where he's just in what you could call a light nap. Luke is actually like trapped by the dark side in the corners of his own mind, like unable to move but still somehow alive. Luke got pwned, basically, in this series by Exar Kun. He's like, "Oh, you think you're gonna teach a new generation and boom, trapped you inside your own brain."
I just laugh sometimes pretty hard, Mike, because I feel like people that haven't seen Arrested Development, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and Rick and Morty can't track 85% of your references.
Well, I try to do a little bit of everything with my references, so people can maybe, hopefully, at least one.
Yeah, but here's the fun part about that.
The fun part is you do track.
Yeah, I track those, and the people that know those shows like the back of their hand. Like they're not missing one reference, especially the Arrested Development fans. They're not missing one.
Would you turn on the Cartoon Network and get the hell out of here?
Oh man, so yeah,
that's not where I expected this episode
let's
to
start
go.
calling Luke 2, like Lucille 2. Luke 2.
That's what we should.
We should. Why didn't they do that? So this story is really interesting, Mike, because now Luke's in this Force coma we mentioned, and his students actually have to figure out on their own what to do. And Luke is actually kind of trapped in the spirit realm of the Jedi, the netherworld of the Force they've talked about in the movies. He's trapped there, and he's trapped there with
potentially the space between spaces that shows up in Rebels.
Right, there's a lot of wolves everywhere. And Ahsoka is awesome. You're just like, beep, beep, beep. Yeah, save that for the top shelf. But that's what we need to do on the top shelf, Mike. We need to have another obscene Mike Filoni rant. That was.
I just have a great idea for what we should do next time with that.
So this is actually a pretty cool part in the story because Luke's students kind of team up and try to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, Kip, drunk with power of the dark side, takes the Sun Crusher and flies away. And Exar Kun's like, good, very Palpatine-esque. And he goes and kills potentially 1 million people, thousands of people in an Imperial system.
Millions of people.
Oh no!
A million people at that one Imperial base. He wipes out the entire training facility on Karita and the surrounding planets, and accidentally kills his brother in the process.
Oh,
so,
it's terrible. But
it's terrible. But
that's the dark side, though.
You had Luke telling you. I know it's the dark side. Luke telling you what to do. Han trying to save him, and Han ultimately did sort of get him to snap out of it. Yeah. As a pseudo father figure or whatever.
And we harp on this because Kip is going to be a major character in all the stories going forwards, just like we talked about Mara Jade and some of the others that have come up. Once again, Mara Jade comes to Luke's temple, but she doesn't stay very long. She kind of leaves early.
She's like, "Oh, you're doing a terrible job. I'm out."
She sees that crisp bacon body and just leaves. She's like, she sees Gentoris's ponytail on fire and says, "I'm out of here." So she leaves. But I don't know. I like this story a lot, Mike, because it culminates to Kip coming back eventually. But before Kip comes back, all of Luke's Jedi students actually find a way to communicate with Luke, and that's actually through the children of Han and Leia. They can communicate to Luke. Yeah. Something, about them being children, the mind of a child, like we said with Yoda, which is really interesting. They can communicate with Luke in the netherworld of the Force, but his students can't. And the children, the students, and Luke all combine their Force Kamehameha together, and they shoot Exar Kun in the face and send him to the netherworld forever, gone. And we're going to build more on this story in a second in iJedi, because there's actually a little end part to that conflict, which I find really interesting. But they essentially Care Bear stare Exar Kun away. Like I told you.
I like that you're on board the reference wagon now.
Oh, they come up for me. It's just not as... Yeah. So...
Okay.
And Luke comes back to life.
Yeah.
Luke basically comes back to his body after Exar Kun is defeated.
He's not being locked in anymore, I guess. Yeah. And then we talked about iJedi, which is a book that I argued with Jesse and some of our listeners over if we should even cover.
Sure.
But ultimately they won. And it tells the story of the Jedi Academy trilogy from a different character's perspective,
From a student.
fills in
Yeah.
some details.
Yeah.
It's not a bad book. My point was just we don't need it. But anyway.
Yeah, pretty really enjoyable reread, and it's pretty interesting to see our main character in I, Jedi, Corran Horn, who's going to come up again in the future, actually dealing with Exar Kun at the temple, which was super cool to reread that, where him and Mara Jade fight Exar Kun while the students are fighting the spirit, basically. So Exar Kun's in two places at once, and they're kind of distracting him, and that's part of the reason why he's more easily defeated by the students, which I enjoy. But eventually, this story ends in an interesting way. Mike Corran Horn, being the kind of smuggler, rogue pilot character he was, and he kind of tentatively,
he was a goody-goody. He wasn't a smuggler.
He kind of went into the Jedi stuff apprehensively, but Wedge and Luke twisted his arm, like we talked about in our episode. And the very end, after he sees how Luke takes Kip back into the fold after what Kip did to those people and things like that, Corran's like, well, I resigned from the Jedi Order.
And I talked about this a lot in the episode, because Corran's like, what the hell is wrong with the rest of you? Do you not see what this kid did? You can't just let him off the...
Like, Corran's like, I respect you, Luke,
this.
but I can't be around that Kip kid. And
but you are wrong.
And the story ends, which is really cool. Like we mentioned, Corran goes back to Yavin 4 and destroys all of Exar Kun's temples with his X-Wing, just to make sure all the Horcruxes are 100% dead. He's like, I'm not messing around with this. Really enjoyable read, those 4 books that kind of tell the Jedi Academy trilogy. Also, the Corran Horn stuff, we actually get a really interesting look at Luke, because we get more conversations with Luke that are not in the trilogy at all with Corran.
Yeah. So those are the Legends books that we've covered to this point.
Right.
And it's interesting to go back and sort of look at, the ground that Luke has covered, because this is all 12 years after the Battle of Endor, after Return of the Jedi. Luke hasn't accomplished just a whole lot. Like, there have been adventures, but there's also been a lot of mistakes of getting starship crews killed, of getting potential Jedi students killed, of engaging in irresponsible relationships and getting that student killed.
Oh,
he's gotten 2 girlfriends killed at this point, but he has had 3 girlfriends that are not his sister in Legends to this point.
True.
So, like, ultimately, the Jedi Academy trilogy ends on a high note with, Exar Kun being defeated and Luke having his temple. But it's not like things have gotten off to a great start either, because he's got his dozen students, -1 now.
Yeah, that's true. -1. I'll say 3 girlfriends is pretty liberal. I'll say 1 girlfriend, 2 girls that could have turned into something, then nothing happened because they either died or ran away or something. So the senator was the only girlfriend.
But when they died, he got them killed. So that's worse.
Oh no. They were just they just liked his look, or they liked the green lightsaber. I don't know. They never took off. But yeah, I know what you mean. But he does have 1 major girlfriend at this point, which is pretty interesting, because we hadn't seen that out of Luke out of the movies yet.
Yeah, and not that ultimately contributes to his character. I think that's just a fun thing to keep track of. But yeah, so he's established this training temple, and if we were trying to draw comparisons to The Last Jedi and the stuff we've seen in now, like, yeah, Luke did have a dozen students at a training temple, and something did go horribly wrong. In Legends, he was able to save the rest of the students and the
including
temple.
Kylo or Kip. He saved the Kylo in this story.
Yeah. But canon, obviously, things went a little different. So perhaps in episode 9, we'll get the rest of the backstory on what happened there.
Yeah, the Jedi Praxium, the Jedi Temple. It's pretty interesting, Mike. Some notable points in these stories is we got Luke building his lightsaber. We got Luke getting his first girlfriend, like you said, but also Luke experiencing his first command and regretting it on 2 stories back to back. Luke encountering force-sensitive people on the planet of Dathomir that are not Jedi or Sith, and dealing with that and kind of learning from them, but also learning that the Force is kind of everywhere and manifests in different ways, and everyone's a Jedi. And then we got the Thrawn trilogy and Luke dealing with Mara Jade and obviously Jorah Sabaoth, which is very important for Luke's character growth. And then we got Dark Empire, which I don't really even consider canon in the old canon, but it's just essentially Luke going to the dark side, which is important. And is referenced in the Jedi Academy. And then we have the Jedi Academy trilogy, which we just went over, where Luke has so much happen with all his students. One of his students dies, another one goes to the dark side but comes back. They fight a ancient Sith Lord who's kind of half alive because he already was defeated before. His physical form was defeated, and they defeat his Horcrux form, like you said. So a lot of important stuff for Luke at this point.
Yeah, so to foreshadow a little bit into some of the books that are coming up in our Legends discussion,
Sure.
and tie it back to The Last Jedi, Yoda says the greatest failure is, well, we just went over a truckload of Luke failures, and we start to see the lessons he's learned paid off in the next several novels of the Jedi Academy successfully expanding and like training students and creating functional Jedi.
That's right.
And defeating Sith Lords without any super weapons falling into the wrong hands. So there's a lot of good things coming for Luke in the next several weeks of this legend story that we're going to do.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it, Mike. And like I said, it's kind of the second act of this kind of Legends thing. This might be more acts than we anticipate, but we're kind of done with an entire act of this Legends chunk of story. So it's kind of a good stopping point before we move forward and get the next stuff. This next batch of Legends is actually my personal least favorite. It's kind of like all the filler books we have until the New Jedi Order and all the series that follow it. But there are probably some really important Luke parts in them, because we actually have Luke experience some things in these stories that probably is going to be hazy for us, because these are the least memorable stories, I would say.
Yeah.
And the stories that people have reread the least.
So we just tried our best to condense 20-ish episodes.
20 episodes.
Into about an hour. So hopefully if you're a new listener and you sort of understood some of what we talked about, I know it would be impossible to follow everything if you hadn't read these books. Right. But we hope that we sort of took you on a journey through that first act in Legends of, Luke from the time we meet him in New Hope to first establishing the Jedi Academy. You got any last thoughts on those books or this entire arc before we move on?
No, I really enjoyed it so far, and we'll see where it goes from here. It's nice to revisit this, and might be our most important arc for quite some time, Mike, so something we're going to have to hang on to.
That's right. So plug time. If you like what we do, you can support us at patreon.com/thecannoncantina.
That's right.
We've got several different tiers for you to pledge some monthly support. It could be as much or as little as $1 a month, maybe a cup of coffee a month, or if you really like what we do and want to be on the show, be part of the show, spend some more money on that. You can check out the different tiers we have at the website, patreon.com/thecannoncantina. If you join at the $5 tier or higher, and that's our second tier, so just above the $1, you get access to our second podcast feed, our second show. It's called the Canon Cantina Top Shelf, where we talk about things that are not necessarily Star Wars. Sometimes it is Star Wars. The last Top Shelf episode we did was about superhero movies in 2018 and what's coming up in 2019. Who knows?
I enjoyed it.
Some of the topics that we'll find there. We will take suggestions from patrons on topics for the Top Shelf. We've a few ideas hashed out. I still one day when we don't have a topic for the Top Shelf, we're gonna fight about Iron Man 3.
Right, we'll get there eventually. Well, there's a lot to talk about until Star Wars Celebration.
That's true. If you like our Skywalker show, you might also like the Top Shelf, our show where basically this conversation happens about anything not on Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, a lot looser and a lot more silly at times, but I would also say pretty fluid because we just kind of go. We don't have any specific text to get through, but we have probably some thoughts on paper we've written down that we want to talk about. I really enjoyed Mike and I's superhero conversation, so that's a good episode to listen to if you're a part of our Patreon. It should be up within like a day or so, Mike. So when you're hearing this episode, it'll be way up before that. So that's worth mentioning.
Giggity.
So another way you can support us on the show, guys, is by leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, and your review will be read on the show. This week we have a new review, so every time you guys leave us a review, we will read it on the show. We are almost caught up, Mike, on all of our reviews, which makes me sad, but if people keep leaving us reviews, we will get to keep reading them. But I hope there's a point where we never get to stop reading reviews, or at least there's minor lulls between these.
This one pisses me off. Do I know this person? Is someone just like intentionally trying to get me?
I'm not sure. I read this review and I said, this sounds like one of my closest friends. It sounds like my yeah. So I have suspicions, but I kind of love it. It's kind of what you do, Mike. It's some trolling. It's some I
am much more
some strong
subtle
opinions.
And sophisticated in my trolling than this.
It's some strong opinions. It's some well-spoken words here. So I'm going to read this so Mike can just listen, drink his beer or whatever while we get through this.
Okay. No. So the review is from @TheRealTrump, which when I saw that, I sent Jesse a screenshot and I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
But the review is actually quite nice. So you got me with your username, but thank you so much for the review that Jesse's going to read.
I love it so much, and hopefully I can read this correctly because this is by far our best written review so far, and uses the most
longest
vocab words as well. For many of years, we have not seen a greater time of calamity and mistrust since the Living Force heresy. So that's a reference to Legends, which we're going to get to later, Mike, if you remember that. Then in this post-Disney Star Wars universe that we now find ourselves. However, it is here that Jesse and Mike make a bold attempt to unify all Star Wars-dom by chronicling the life of one singular Jedi through whom no greater failure, redemption, and ultimate sacrifice has been wrought. I'm not done.
Dang.
That's pretty good. If there's anything or anyone that can unite us in this dangerous world of scum and villainy, then it is Luke Skywalker and his hero's journey. Follow this podcast to see the transformation of a poor moisture farmer into one of the greatest Jedi of our time.
Of our time, a long time ago.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for this review, The Real Trump. I didn't know you were a fan.
It just sounds so gross when you say it like that.
And all truthfulness,
stop listening to us during executive time and run the country. Damn it.
Yeah, I think in all truthfulness, I'm familiar with this writing. I'm familiar with this prose. I'm familiar with the use of @TheRealTrump. This has to be my closest friend, Samuel Stropes, but we'll see. We'll see.
You got me, Samuel.
I have to touch base with him and ask, but this is about as good as it gets. The bar has been set for the reviews, guys. So once again, I really appreciate this review because it kind of summarizes Mike and I's goal on this show, to bring people from different paths of Star Wars and kind of just. He mentions calamity and distrust here. Those are good vocab words for what's going on the internet and Star Wars right now, which is kind of absurd to us. And we're people with two different opinions on Star Wars, and we get to hang out and talk Star Wars every week and make it work. So that's what we want to do through this show. So I like this review a lot for that reason.
Oh no! Thank you again so much. That is
also the Living Force,
fantastic.
The Living Force reference. That's a reference to some post New Jedi Order stuff. That's pretty funny. Living Force heresy. So we'll get to that later. I'll try to remember this review and bring that up when we get to that in the Legends storylines.
So again, you can leave us a rating on iTunes or whatever. Write us. We're still waiting for that super funny 1-star review to come in, but thank you so much to everybody else who's left us positive reviews there.
It helps us out a lot.
If it's going to be 1 star, it's got to be funny. You can go to thecanoncantina.com for all of our social media. That's at the Canon Cantina if you search for it other places. And you can actually listen to the show and watch previous
That's right.
broadcasts on our page. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, Podcast Addict, YouTube, and Spotify. Some of you are watching us live on Twitch now. Hi, thank you so
Yes.
much for staying with us this whole time.
Yeah, seriously.
And you can support us on Patreon, like I talked about a few minutes ago. And we actually have some stuff for sale, like shirts and stickers on TeePublic. So if you go to TeePublic and search for the Canon Cantina, or I believe the actual URL is tpublic.com/user/the Canon Cantina.
That's right. You should find our logo wear there, guys. We have so many shirts. We have those notebooks that I mentioned like in the last episode. He was like, notebooks, stickers.
We have notebooks?
And we have an art piece, some pretty cool stuff with the Canon Cantina logo. And for those of you guys that have actually gone to that page and already bought shirts, it means so much to us. You have no idea. It was another one of our major goals that we launched this before Star Wars Celebration. So even if there's just a couple people wearing this stuff now, it's great. But we're hopefully going to take a chunk of this stuff with us to Star Wars Celebration and things like that. And we're very excited to get more merch in the future. If this stuff takes off, including the Patreon, we can pursue that. But right now, this is just a test. We're going to see how it goes. But keep spreading the word of our show by subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. If you think we can do something better, or you have an idea for a future show, or just some other topic you want to talk to us about, send us an email at canoncantina@gmail.com. Most importantly, Mike, we actually didn't talk about this episode, but Star Wars Celebration's coming up. Not only are we going, but we are performing the show on live on the Star Wars Celebration podcast stage. That's right. The Canon Cantina will be live at Star Wars Celebration. We are going to figure out streaming there. We're going to figure out recording. We're going to get you guys special interviews and all kinds of stuff. So make sure you're following us on all our social media and our podcast feed so you can get all that delivered to you basically daily when we're at Star Wars Celebration. But next week, Mike, we start a new arc in Star Wars.
No, we don't. We're going to start that in 2 weeks because next week we are going to do this same episode, but for the canon stories. So we're going to go back to the films and then talk about the stories that are current canon since Disney bought Lucasfilm and started releasing sequels and new comics.
That's right. And if you guys want to get ahead on our reading our next reading, what I was about to mention is Children of the Jedi by Barbara Hambly. And that is kind of the beginning of a 3-part spiritual trilogy. It's 3 books individually by themselves, but they kind of all connect directly. They're all back to back, even though they're written by different authors. And that is our next, essentially, Legends trilogy we're going to do before Star Wars Celebration. So if you want to get a head start, visit our Audacity page, which is always in the show notes of the show. Let me re-say
Audible.
that. Let me re-say that. Let me re-say that. If you guys want to listen to that on audible.com/the Canon Cantina, go to our link and listen to that. Our Audible links are always in the show notes. Same with our Patreon and everything else.
I had a great time with today's episode. We didn't really know where this was going to take us, but we knew we needed to do our best to give new listeners a jumping on point. But that was a great kind of just going back over the highlights of what we've done for the past 6-ish months. We hope you enjoyed it too. So thanks for hanging out with us today in the Canon Cantina. Cheers, everybody.
May the Force be with you.